Hey, this is Tao Chow from MTG Forge, and today I'm going to be talking about something I'm calling Free Deck Frenzy. And basically what I was thinking is well, is it possible to make a good deck just using the cards you can get from the free bots on MTGO? And so basically it's a completely free deck, and I think I've come up with something good. So basically, here's all the free bots that I know of. So there's a Clan Team free, Card Hoarder free bot, Dojo Trade free, and MTGO Traders free bot. And basically what it is, I went into these bots and tried to get whatever I could for free. And not just anything, of course, but just making a good deck out of it. So it's a little bit tricky because when you go into these, there's only so many things you can take at a time. And you can't take just forever to search the cards, and there's a ton of great cards in some of these. Sometimes it's very difficult. Here, I'll just jump into MTGO Traders. Okay, so you'll be able to see there's a ton of cards in here. There'll be a ton of land as well. I was looking recently for Hunt the Week, so just reset the filters. Alright, so you can see there's just a ton of cards that you can get. Now, most of these are low value cards, but that doesn't mean that they are just terrible cards. Right? So it just depends what you want to do, but there's a lot of them. So you kind of have to be fast when you're looking around. You can't take too long. And you just kind of have to get an idea of what you want to do. I thought it was actually a lot of fun to do that, and it took me a little while to get around. Now, the best bot I found so far is actually the Card Hoarder free bot. You can only take 64 free cards from there, which isn't even enough to make a whole deck, but, well, it's enough to make your main deck, but just not your sideboard as well. So that Card Hoarder's free bot actually has probably the best creatures and the best spells in it. Surprisingly powerful stuff. Clan Team Free has some good stuff as well, but you can only take 1 uncommon or 4 commons per day, and so over time it would take you, a long time to gather the cards you might want, but they've got some good stuff too. MTGO Traders and Dojo Trade Free are also really good, but they tend to have a little bit weaker stuff. It's good to get some nice illustrated lands, the nice art lands and stuff like that you're wanting. So let me show you what I've done, what I've grabbed, and we'll take a look. And then I'll talk about how the interactions can go together. The first thing I did was look around at the different cards to see what type of effects and synergy I could get between them. Now there's a lot of cards, but one thing I noticed was that there's a few cards that were interesting that put +1/+1 counters on other creatures. And I thought that was kind of interesting, so I decided to kind of go with that theme. So the first one I found was Sen's Tactician. Now, Sen's Tactician is a 1/1 for 1 white, and basically you can pay a white and tap him and put a +1/+1 counter on a target soldier creature. And then every creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it, not just soldiers, can block an additional creature. So I thought, okay, that's actually pretty interesting. He's a 1/1 for 1, which isn't too bad, but he's also got some upside to him, so I thought, let's go with that. The next card I noticed was Hero of Liana Tower. Now this is a 1/1 for 1 green who has a heroic ability that whenever she's the target of a spell, you can pay whatever extra mana you might have and add that many counters to her. Now that's only going to work later in the game when you have a lot of extra mana, but I thought it's still better than nothing, and it looks interesting, so I think I can fit her in, and I was able to get 3 of those. I also noticed that there was 3 Servants of the Scale. Now, Servant of the Scale is it's a 0/0 for 1 green, but technically it's a 1/1 because it comes into the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it. Servant of the Scale has a great ability, though, that when it dies, it puts its 1/1 counters on other creatures you control. So when we use Sen's Tactician to put a 1/1 counter on him because he is a soldier, then if he dies later, he doesn't lose his counters. He just puts them on some other creature and boosts your other creatures up, which is actually pretty nice. I was also able to get 3 of those, which is nice for consistency. The next card is really the powerhouse of this deck, Phalanx Leader. Phalanx Leader is a card that I've always loved because I started playing in Theros block, and he's got a heroic ability that's just amazing. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Phalanx Leader, you can put a +1/+1 counter on every creature you control, including the Phalanx Leader. So whenever you have a pump spell that adds, say, a +1/+1 to him, it actually adds +2/+2 counters to him, and then a 1/1 to every other creature, which just gets out of hand super quickly. They had tons of them in the Card Hoarder free bot, and I was able to grab 4 of them. The next card was Seeker of the Way, which I was able to grab 2 of. Seeker of the Way is a a 2/2 for 2 with Prowess. Now, Prowess is a great ability because what it allows you to do is whenever you cast a spell, it doesn't have to target Seeker of the Way. It just actually gives him a +1/+1 till end of turn, and he also gets lifelink, which helps you extend the game. This can get really, really out of hand as well, especially when combined with a Phalanx Leader, because the Phalanx Leader can add +1/+1 counters to him, and then when he attacks, he gets you tons of life, which just is really, really amazing. Absan Falconer was a 2/3 for 2 and a white, and he has Outlast, which is just costs 1, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you can control. This is similar to the Sen's Tactician's ability, but the best thing about him is that all the creatures with +1/+1 counters on them have flying, which gives you tons of evasion, and if this deck works out pretty well, all of your creatures are going to have 1/1 counters on them, and so they're all going to be flying, which is just great. Lastly is High Sentinels of Irration. Now, a lot of people I've talked to said they didn't really like this card, but I don't really know why. He's a 3/4 for 4 with flying, which is already good on its own, but he also gets +1/+1 for every other creature with +1/+1 counters on him, which is basically all your creatures, which really is great synergy with the rest of your creatures. So after this, I was looking around at the cards, and I know I have to find a way to pump these creatures, to target them, so I can activate their heroic abilities and get these +1/+1 counters out. And here's what I found. The first card I found is a 3 of Giant Growth. This is a 1 mana for target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. It's actually pretty good because it's at instant speed. You can cast it on your opponent's turn when they're in combat or when they target you with something, and it will give your heroic creatures a pump whenever they might need it. The second card was Hunt Down. Now, I hadn't seen this card before, but it's actually very good for a number of reasons. The first thing it does is it's 1 green for target creature blocks target creature if possible this turn. Now, the first reason why it's good is because, well, it targets 2 creatures. An interesting thing you can do with this card is actually target 2 of your own creatures, and then what will happen is that during the combat, they're not able to block each other, so they just don't block each other, but you still get the 2 target triggers. So you can use this to pump 2 heroic figures like 2 Phalanx Leaders at the same time. Another thing is that this is a sorcery that can be used as a form of removal. So if your opponent is holding up a creature and just won't block with him, you can force him to block with that creature and get rid of it. The last thing I want to say about this card is that it's important in the order that you select the targets. The first target is the blocker, the second target is the attacker. If you set it the other way, I don't think that it will actually resolve the way you might intend it to resolve. So make sure you set their blocker first, and then you target your attacker second. Now, the next set of cards I found was Common Bond and Reap What Is Sown. Both of the cards are almost doing the same thing, but they have a slightly different effect. They both cost 1 of anything, 1 green and 1 white, for very similar effects. Common Bond puts a +1/+1 counter on a target creature and then on another target creature. Now, the good thing about this is you can actually target the same creature twice. Now, remember, you won't get the same heroic trigger twice because it's still the same spell. Reap What Is Sown puts +1/+1 counters on 3 different creatures. You don't have to put it on 3 creatures. You could just put it on 1 or 2 if you want. But most of the time, you're going to have a lot of creatures out on the board, and you're going to want to pump all your creatures. Now, lastly, we have Dragonscale Boon, which was a 2 of that I could only find. It's a very, very good card. It puts 2 +1/+1 counters on a target creature and untaps that creature at instant speed. So a lot of times I found I might have to tap out to attack and might be able to trick my opponent to attack me. And then at the last minute, I can put 2 +1 counters on it and then also get a heroic trigger and untap so I can block. Now, I had one more spot, and what I did is I found a card called Veteran's Reflexes. Now, this card's not really that good. I'm going to look for another Reap What Is Sown and try and replace that over time, but essentially it's kind of the baby brother of Dragonscale Boon. It costs 1 white, puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and untaps it. Finally, I knew I needed some form of removal. So I found a card called Condemn. Condemn costs 1 white to put your target's attacking creature on the bottom of his library. It's not a great form of removal, and something like a Path to Exile would definitely be better, but you're not going to find Path to Exile in the free bots. Another alternative to this that I considered was a card called Pacifism that makes it so a targeted creature can't attack or block. But the problem with that is that its activated abilities can still remain in the battlefield, so I'm not sure which one is the better one. I decided to go with 4 Condemn, but I might change to maybe 2 and 2 or 3 and 1 or something like that in the future. For the lands, I found 4 Vivid Groves and also 4 Vivid Meadows. Now, those 2 cards enter into the battlefield tapped, but they come with 2 counters, and then what you can do is you can remove a counter and tap it for any color mana. It's kind of the same as just getting some interesting mana fixing, but later on, I found that it was better to switch them for Blossoming Sands and Selesnya Guildgates. Those 2 cards are a little more consistent, especially Blossoming Sand is nice because it gives you +1 life when it enters the battlefield. The last 4 of was Llanowar Reborn. Llanowar Reborn is nice because it has a graft ability, and what you can do is, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you can move a +1 counter from Llanowar Reborn onto that creature. Only one time, of course, but it's still a nice way to just add that +1 counter to a creature and maybe have it come into the battlefield with flying if you got Abzan Falconer online already. Overall, these lands are pretty good. I filled out my last lands with just all plains, and I found that really worked out really well. If you can, go with Vivid Grove or a Vivid Meadow. Those are okay. You're going to be able to find lots of them in the free bots. Blossoming Sand and Selesnya Guildgate is harder to find, but I think those 2 are the better ones. Okay, I would get rid of the Vivid lands if I could. And lastly, in the sideboard, I found 2 Dawn-Glow Infusions for some life gain, 2 Curse of Chains for sort of quasi-removal, 2 Disenchants for enchantment destruction, 4 Dragon Claws for matches against burn, which we were kind of bad at, 3 Hunt the Weak for more creature removal, and 2 Wing Puncture to get rid of things like Delver or other flyers. That's pretty much the whole deck, and I was able to build it for free, like completely for free, which is amazing. If you have any ideas of things that might go better in there that I could also find in the free bots, feel free to put them in the comments. And if you have your own free deck, I challenge you to build your own and see what you can do. Anyways, if you do like these videos, remember to like and subscribe. And if you have something you want to see, put it in the comments. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.